I never thought my own daughter would stand in the doorway of my house, the house I had lived in for 31 years, the house where I raised her, and tell me I was no longer welcome at my granddaughter's birthday party. But that is exactly what happened on a Saturday afternoon in October in Oakville, Ontario, with the maple trees turning gold outside and the smell of birthday cake drifting through the screen door she was blocking with her body. Let me go back, because this story doesn't start at a front door. It starts long before that in a hospital room in Hamilton when I was 34 years old and a doctor told me that my husband, Warren, had 6 months to live. Our daughter was 9, our son was 6, and I had $43 in our checking account and a mortgage I didn't fully understand because Warren had always handled those things. I learned fast. I went back to work within the week. I had a diploma in accounting from Mohawk College, which I had set aside when the children were born, and I called every contact I had, and I found a position at a mid-size firm in Burlington. I worked full days, and I came home and made dinner and helped with homework and cried after the children went to sleep. I did that for 6 months until Warren died, and then I kept doing it, except without the crying eventually. You run out. I built a life. It took years, but I built it. I moved into a smaller house in Oakville when the children were teenagers, a detached 2-story on a quiet street near the lake, and I paid it off by the time my daughter started university. I helped both children with their tuition. I helped my son buy his first car. When my daughter, I will call her my daughter throughout this, because that is what she is, whatever else she became. When she met her husband at a conference in Toronto and they moved in together after 8 months, I lent them the deposit on their condo. $42,000. She said she would pay it back when they were settled. I said there was no rush. I meant it. I was not a perfect mother. I worked long hours. There were recitals I missed and dinners I reheated from the fridge and stretches when I was so tired I could not properly listen. I know that. I have thought about it a great deal in the past year and a half, and I am not trying to make myself into someone I wasn't. But I loved my children completely, and I showed up, and I kept the lights on, and I never let them feel the fear I felt every single day for years. My daughter's husband, I will call him my son-in-law, is a pleasant enough man when things are going his way. He works in commercial real estate in Mississauga. He wears nice clothes and tells good stories at dinner, and he has always been polite to me in the way that people are polite when they consider you a minor character in their own story. I noticed it early. I simply chose not to make it an issue. They had a daughter, my granddaughter, who is now 5 years old and the light of my life in a way I did not anticipate and cannot properly explain to anyone who doesn't have grandchildren. I was at the hospital the night she was born. I cried in the hallway outside the delivery room in a way I had not cried since Warren died. Something cracked open in me. I babysat every week. I drove 40 minutes each way without complaint. I brought groceries when they were busy. When my daughter went back to work after maternity leave and they couldn't find a spot in daycare, I took my granddaughter 3 days a week for 7 months. I did not ask for anything in return. I did not keep a tally. That is not why I did it. But I am telling you this so you understand what I was to that family. I was not a distant grandmother who sent birthday cards with checks. I was there. I was woven into the fabric of their daily life. And then something changed. It happened gradually and then all at once, which is how most things do. My son-in-law had a new colleague, a woman whose mother lived nearby, and that mother began appearing at events. She was younger than me, early 50s, recently divorced, very eager to be useful. I did not feel threatened. I am not a jealous person. But I noticed that my daughter began speaking about her often. His mother brought the most amazing charcuterie board. His mother knows a wonderful decorator. His mother took the baby for the whole weekend so we could go to Tremblant. I said nothing. I smiled. I continued driving 40 minutes each way. The shift in my son-in-law was harder to trace but easier to feel. He began making small comments about my car, which is a 2017 Camry and runs perfectly well, about the neighborhood where I live, which he called dated, about how things were done at their house versus how I might do things. Small things. The kind of thing that, if you mention it, you are told you are being too sensitive. Last Christmas, I arrived at their house with gifts and a turkey I had brined for 2 days, and I walked into the kitchen to find his mother already there, arranging flowers at my counter. Not her counter, the counter where I had stood every Christmas for 5 years, and my daughter said, very casually, "Oh, we thought it would be nice to have Diane here this year too." No warning. No conversation beforehand. I said that was lovely, and I put my turkey in the oven, and I sat down and I smiled for 4 hours. But I noticed that there was a chair at the head of the table that year. A new chair, cushioned, with armrests positioned where I had always sat, and Diane sat in it, and no one said a word. I drove home that night, and I sat in my car in my driveway in the dark for a long time. The birthday party was in October. My granddaughter was turning 5. I had been talking to her about it for weeks. She wanted a fairy theme, and I had spent 3 evenings making a set of hand-painted wooden fairy doors, small enough to fit in her palm, each one a different color with tiny hinges that actually moved. I am not a crafty person by nature. I watched tutorial videos. I practiced on scrap wood. I wanted them to be right. I arrived at 2 o'clock, which was the time on the invitation. I had a wrapped box under one arm and a bakery box under the other, her favorite lemon tarts from the place in Burlington she always asked for when she came to my house. My daughter opened the door. She looked at me, and something moved across her face that I had never seen before. Not surprise. Not guilt. Something more settled than that, like a decision that had already been made. She said, "Mom, this isn't a good time." I said, "I'm sorry." She said, and I want to be precise here because I have replayed this sentence many times. She said, "We've decided to keep today small, just close family." I stood there on my own front step. The step I had stood on hundreds of times. I could hear children laughing somewhere inside the house. I could smell the cake. I said, "I am close family." She said, "Mom, please don't make this difficult." And then she looked over her shoulder and I understood. Diane was inside. Diane was close family. I was the one making things difficult. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. Something went very cold and very still in me, the way it did the morning after Warren died, when I had 2 children looking at me across the breakfast table, and I understood that falling apart was not available to me. I handed her the lemon tarts because I did not want them to go to waste, and they were my granddaughter's favorite. I kept the fairy doors. I walked back to my car. I drove home. I did not call. I did not send a message. I did not, as I might have done at another point in my life, reach out to explain how I was feeling in the hope that she would understand. Instead, I called my accountant. Her name is not important. What is important is that she has worked with me for 11 years, and she is calm and precise and not easily surprised. I asked her to come to my house the following week. I made tea. I put the folder on the table. The folder I had kept at the back of my filing cabinet, the one with the records of every financial transfer I had made to my daughter and her husband over the years. the deposit, the tuition, the loan we had taken out together in both our names to renovate their kitchen 2 years prior. My name was still on that loan, which I had been quietly servicing from my own account because they had asked me to hold off while they sorted some cash flow issues. The respert I had been contributing to for my granddaughter since she was born, which was in my name as subscriber. My accountant looked at the folder for a while. Then she looked at me. She said, "What would you like to do?" I said, "I'd like to understand my options. I am not going to pretend that what I did next was without anger. It was not. But it also was not reckless. I thought carefully for several weeks. I asked myself, more than once, whether I was doing this from hurt or from clarity. I think the honest answer is that by the time I acted, it had become clarity. The hurt had burned off. What was left was something simpler. I had been removed from my granddaughter's birthday party while another woman sat in my chair, and the $42,000 deposit had never been repaid, and my name was on a home renovation loan, and I had driven 40 minutes each way every week for 5 years, and no one had thought any of that was worth protecting. The response I left entirely alone. That money was my granddaughter's. It had nothing to do with her parents, and I would not touch it. The kitchen renovation loan, however, I stopped servicing from my account. I notified the bank that I would be making no further payments on behalf of the co-borrowers and that I was formally requesting restructuring. This triggered an automatic review. The bank contacted my daughter and her husband. The first they knew about what was coming was a letter from their lender. The $42,000 deposit, I had documentation of the transfer and a text message from my daughter from 8 years ago saying, "Of course we'll pay it back, Mom. We just need a bit of time." I spoke with a lawyer. She was honest with me. After 8 years with no repayment schedule in writing, recovery would be difficult. But the formal letter from my lawyer, sent to their home address, had an effect I had not entirely anticipated. My son-in-law, it turned out, had recently applied for a line of credit for a real estate investment. The outstanding debt showing on records from my lawyer's correspondence became a complication. I did not plan that. I want to be honest about that, but I did not prevent it either. The call came on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the birthday party. My daughter, which meant she had waited long enough for things to have already started moving. She said, "Mom, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm making dinner." She said, "You know what I mean?" And her voice, I had not heard that voice since she was a teenager. That mix of anger and fear that tells you someone has realized they've made a miscalculation. I said, "I think we should talk in person." She came to my house on Saturday. Her husband stayed home. She sat at my kitchen table and she looked older than I expected, which surprised me even though it shouldn't have. I let her talk first. She said it had been a misunderstanding. She said I had taken it the wrong way. She said Diane had already RSVP'd and the house was small and she hadn't known how to tell me and she was sorry it came out the way it did. I listened to all of it. And then I said, very quietly, "I stood on your doorstep with lemon tarts and you told me to leave." And then I drove home and I sat in my car and I thought about every time I drove 40 minutes each way and every dollar I have ever given you. And I thought about your father and what he would have done if someone had told him his mother wasn't close family. She started crying then. I had not intended for that to be a weapon, that I also did not soften it. I told her that the loan situation was in the hands of the bank and my accountant and would need to be sorted properly, which meant coming up with a real repayment plan rather than a promise. I told her that the deposit would need to be addressed, not necessarily in full immediately, but acknowledged in writing as a real debt with a real timeline. and I told her that I would not be continuing to make myself available in the way I had been. The weekly driving, the babysitting, the showing up whenever it was convenient for them, unless the terms of our relationship changed. She said, "What does that mean? The terms of our relationship? You're my mother." I said, "Yes, I am." That's the part that makes this so hard. We talked for 2 hours. It was not a pleasant conversation. It was honest, which is different. In the months that followed, things changed slowly. My son-in-law, to his credit, was the one who called my lawyer and initiated the repayment conversation. I think the line of credit complication clarified things for him in a way that my feelings had not. They set up a monthly transfer. It has come on time every month since. My daughter and I, that took longer. There were weeks when we did not speak, and weeks when we spoke carefully, like people learning a new language. She asked me once during one of those careful conversations whether I thought she had married someone who had changed her. I said, I thought she had allowed herself to be changed, which was different, and which meant she could also choose differently. I do not know if she fully understood that, but she wrote it down, which told me something. My granddaughter's 6th birthday was in October of this year. I was there. I sat where I always sat. I brought lemon tarts, and I brought the fairy doors, which I had kept in tissue paper in my closet for a full year. And when I gave them to her, she held each one up to the light and opened and closed the little hinges and said they were the most magical thing she had ever seen. I watched her, this small person with her whole life ahead of her, turning a tiny painted door over in her hands like it was something precious. And I thought of Warren. I thought of the $43 in the checking account and the mortgage I didn't understand, and the doctor's face when he told me, and the years of learning fast and showing up and keeping the lights on. I thought he would have liked to see this. That was enough. I kept the fairy doors in tissue paper for a full year. That detail still catches me sometimes, that I wrapped them up carefully instead of throwing them away, even on the worst nights. I think I knew, somewhere underneath the hurt, that the story wasn't finished yet. People ask me whether I regret what I did. The honest answer is no, not because I am hard, but because I had spent decades being soft in the wrong direction. Soft are people who mistook my kindness for a guarantee, who assumed that love without conditions meant love without consequences. It doesn't. That is not what love is. What I did in those weeks after the birthday party was not revenge in the way people imagine it. I did not act from rage. Rage had burned through me in the car that night, and by morning it was gone, replaced by something quieter and clearer. I acted from a recognition that I had been allowing a slow erosion of my own worth, and that no one was going to stop it except me. That is a hard thing to see about yourself. It requires a kind of honesty that is uncomfortable, because it means admitting that you participated in your own diminishment by staying silent, by being endlessly available, by telling yourself that keeping the peace was the same as keeping the relationship. It wasn't. Keeping the peace was just postponing the reckoning. My daughter is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly. She is someone who drifted the way people do when they are not paying attention to their own compass, when they allow someone else's priorities to slowly replace their own. My son-in-law is not a villain either. He is a man who saw what he could get away with and took it, which is a very ordinary human failing. What matters is not who they were at their worst, but whether they were capable of being something better. And I think they are. The monthly transfers arrive on time. My daughter and I talk differently now, more carefully, yes, but also more honestly, which I will take. What I want to pass on, if anything, is this: the three things that carried me through, not just this past year, but the whole of my life since Warren died, were doing right by people, even when it cost me, thinking clearly instead of reacting, and refusing to stay down. I learned those things not from books, but from necessity. From being 34 years old with $43 and two children who needed breakfast. You either find those things in yourself or you don't make it. I found them. My granddaughter turned her fairy door over in her hands and said it was magical. She was right, not because of the craft. I am not a natural at woodworking and the hinges are slightly uneven, but because it had waited for her through everything and it arrived in the end. That is what holding on looks like, not loud, not dramatic, just patient and clear and still there when it matters.